Hello, we are sitting here on the stage, just finished Media Innovation Week here in Dublin. And before we get over to the pub for a couple of pints, we're going to dig into some of the things that we learned. I'm Amalie Nash. I'm the Newsroom Transformation Initiative lead for INMA. I'm joined by my brilliant colleagues, Gabe, who is the new lead of our advertising initiative, and Greg, who is our Readers First Initiative lead and also our researcher in residence. So the two of you got a chance to sort of have conversation, dig into revenue strategies from the perspective of subscriptions and of advertising. So let's start here. One of the things you said was how important it is that these strategies can work hand in hand. Okay, that's great. Love to see that. Yet, I've worked in a media company where we said that was true, yet the head of advertising would come to us in editorial and say, don't mark as many things subscriber only. Come on, we need more revenue. Get the programmatic advertising up. And then the people on the consumer revenue side would come to us and say, we need to lock down more content. We got to get those subscriptions up. And so really, how do these things work hand in hand? Greg, start with you.
I think traditionally we believe that, in order to be successful in advertising, you need to reach very many people, because then we can match them with, the needs of more advertisers, so we can run more programmatic advertisements. And at the same time, in subscriptions, we rather need to focus on just a slice of people. We need to find who is the most engaged, because they are the most likely to buy. And I think this was a traditional way of thinking for traditional advertising. We know it doesn't work that way with advertising, because the people who actually view more ads on news websites are also super engaged. Actually, the small proportion of overall users actually generate most of the page views and most of the subscriptions. So for example, Clarín in Argentina would have 10% of overall users who might be subscribed or registered, would generate something like 72% of all revenues. So I think over time we realized that there is a slice of population of our users that is much more valuable than others.
You called them super users yesterday, right?
People call them heavy news consumers, news lovers, brand lovers, passionate audiences. But whatever the name is, I think we know that there is a slice of our readership that is much more engaged. What we didn't know so far is whether these people who see more ads are actually more receptive to advertising, or whether they are actually passionate shoppers as well. And I think here is a real breakthrough that we presented at the conference, and Gabe showed some amazing studies showing that here is something new to tell to the folks at the news media industry.
There's no doubt that these things are currently in conflict, or maybe that's too strong, at least in tension in the moment. One of the things that we talked about was this idea of, really echoed by Peter Vandermeersch in his keynote, where he called out this sort of maybe not conflict, but just sort of different moment in time for subscriptions and advertising, right? Subscriptions is operating from the perspective of building and deepening direct relationships, but advertising is still operating from the business of reach and scale. That's true. That's absolutely true. One of the reasons I think is you can argue that news media is driving the innovation in the subscription business itself, operating from an upstream position, whereas news media advertising is responding to the demands of the market and operating more downstream. And so you almost have these things out of time and out of sync in a way. So we want to be sensitive to the fact that we're not saying, hey, stop selling your display advertising, stop trying to sell a lot of it, stop trying to reach a lot of people. That would be absurd. But I think what we're saying is, for the long-term survival of the business and to provide a central operating strategy for revenue, these things ought to be operating from a more unified position.
Yeah.
And does that square with what you're hearing from people out there in the advertising space as you talk to them?
I think there's a dawning realization especially this year, that look, the reach and scale business is changing. It's not just changing for publishers, it's changing writ large in advertising overall. There's a sense that sort of, this scale model isn't really working. There's more of a focus on outcomes. And I think what publishers are asking themselves is, how can we win in the advertising business overall? Those who have participated in the programmatic ecosystem and continue to do so have drawn the conclusion that, the open market isn't really working for us. We're competing against MFA sites. We're competing against non-publisher environments that have no desire, and a lot of them are increasingly produced by AI. That's not a winning proposition long term. We have to think about focusing on what's differentiating about the publisher environment, and that is value of audience, value of environment, value of the service that the environment provides to the audience through the coverage and through the model of journalism. That's different. And now we have to start thinking about, do we build the advertising business around more of this partnership integration model, doing bigger custom things for partners where they can't get these other places. That's things that are centered maybe in the anchors of branded content and events. Display is part of that, video increasingly so. So, advertising will always have, leading indicators and long tails, right? You're always going to have that 20-80% rule. But I think what we're saying is, let's shift the strategic focus of the business to unify the revenue model and find a way forward from there that will set us up to succeed in the future.
Yeah. So, based on the data we collect from news publishers across the world, we know that, publishing stands on 2 feet. One is subscriptions, one is advertising. Subscriptions last year was maybe 46% of revenue for a median news publishing company. Advertising was 43. So you could say these are 2 feet. One is slightly longer than the other, but not much. Overall, of course, there is the third leg, but it's rather short for most. So this is like other sources of revenue. So in general, we know that we have 2 revenue models. We need to make them work together. And what I really found super exciting about these results of studies that you, I think, have presented at your advertising masterclass, these were the guys from the New York Times who did some more in-depth studies about super users, as they call them, that would be heavy consumers for others, and so on, that really established a link between super engagement of people who are subscribers or registered users and their behavior versus advertising and their behavior in shopping, retail, events, space, and so on and so on. So I found it super, super insightful.
That's right. And Valerio Poche presented this in our masterclass, that essentially the Times had done work around focusing on this idea of the super user, who is, and what they found essentially was, and their quest was they'd seen this group who were more engaged with the Times portfolio. And so they started studying the connection to consumer activity, and they found 2 things. One is the most engaged users with the Times were the most valuable consumers. And second, the most engaged users with the Times were the most receptive to advertising across consumer categories and across advertising categories.
Well, they're seeing more of it.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And so they're starting, but it's grounded in those deeper relationships that we're building the subscription strategy around. So this notion of ARPU, which is really sort of a metric that provides a financial indicator of the value of the relationship, is something. Can we draw a connection around that to advertising? If we focus on these most valuable people, how do we do that? I don't think ARPU has a lot of translation into an advertising strategy necessarily. So one of the things that Greg talked about was, some suggestions for other metrics. I don't know if it's something like engagement per user or thinking in those kinds of terms. And again, what we're not saying is ignore everyone else. What we're saying is focus the bullseye on these most valuable people and build from there.
Yeah, so I think what was really interesting is when we learn these insights from the Times and we try to establish whether we can see similar patterns for other publishers. Because obviously, if you ask any other publisher, they would say, but guys, we are not the New York Times, we are not in New York, we are not in the States, we don't have 2,000 journalists, we don't have 11 million subscribers, this is not us. But we actually found, looking at data from hundreds of publishers, that most of them see very similar patterns. A small proportion of, readers or subscribers would generate a high proportion of, let's say, page views, for example, and they would spend significantly higher time. We call it like a subscriber or a super user premium. And basically, they spend much more time, they see many more articles, many more page views, they view many more videos. And interestingly, we can see the same patterns across different media sectors. So it's true for video, it's true for audio, it's true for podcasts, and so on. And there are studies showing that these super users, who are basically super users of media, are also super consumers. They actually, although there is a smaller proportion of total population who are super users across media, they are majority of people who generate spend for, e-commerce, retail, these are people who go to events, people who go to museums, people who spend wonderful vacations. They live their life. Yeah. So in a way, I think this is great realization that there are these people who love their news, they love their lives, and they live very full lives. And at the same time, they are responsive to advertising. They are actually interested in advertising. Advertising is relevant to them. And this is this connection that I think our industry was missing. It's data really showing the connection between the two business models. Because then, if we actually play and we need to put the ball in the same place, then it should be much easier to think about like total revenue management.
Yep.
And driving engagement will be how we actually put the ball to in the right place. And of course, the total revenue will be the ultimate goal. It also means perhaps we need to have one goalkeeper. Perhaps we need to have one manager for the revenue management, with some general managers for subscriptions and advertising, with some OKRs to manage the progress of the two. But in a way, we need to start thinking about, the goalkeeper, what are the metrics. The revenue metrics are of course useful because this is something very much connected with the, with the profitability and so on. But at the same time, we have these engagement metrics that you talked very interestingly about, that can be used by also other stakeholders, like the newsroom, like the audience, like data and product, and so on and so on. And you showed interesting examples from the companies we visited here in Ireland about how they think about metrics. Maybe you could tell us more about it.
Yeah, in the advertising session that we led, there were two examples that I brought over here to cite examples in our talk, and one was from the Irish Times, who talked about this idea of focusing on slow media and building their ad products around that idea. So the idea of slow media is sort of deepen consumption, assume that you have an audience that isn't skimming, that really you're providing them something so valuable that they're going to spend more time with you. So how do you build your ad product roadmap around that? Different kinds of display, different kinds of measurement, different approaches to thinking about what's valuable. The other one was Sonoma Media Finland, who presented their sort of initial roadmap around a video strategy that's grounded in the notion that publishers drive more attention, they drive higher view-through rates around video. So taking advantage of these things that, I would sort of point to two potential tensions in the advertising market that this can help resolve. The first one is really on the publisher side, which is this sort of phenomenon where subscriptions and advertising have been in conflict, right? So that some publishers have positioned advertising as a thing that they'll get rid of if you buy a subscription.
true.
this isn't a great strategy for selling advertising in the market, because what are you saying? You're saying
To
we
the
don't.
advertiser.
That's right.
It's valuable unless someone's willing to
Yeah.
pay us in a different way.
That's right. That's right. So we have to decide.
I think it's more than that.
What-
Actually,
let me finish,
what the data you showed really suggests that if there is the stupidest idea in subscriptions, this is likely to basically have as advertising tier without advertisements, because basically it means you are not going to show the ads to the only people who are much more receptive to the
Exactly.
ads and actually buy the shit. So is it really a good idea? It is likely the opposite. So I think this is a big insight, and many people after our session were telling us, like, is this really what it means? Like, we've done such a stupid thing. Yeah, it's not me to judge, but sorry.
Well, and exactly, and sort of making the decision that we are going to treat advertising with the same aspiration of quality that we treat the rest of the publisher environment is the key to success,
What's the
right?
quality?
That's right.
We talk always about quality journalism. What is quality advertising?
Quality of experience, quality of attention, quality of the connection, quality of the relationship that you have with your audience, which allows you to position and sell advertising in the market differently. I think what it opens the door to is selling more often as a partnership and less as just inventory. And when you start to break down those components, more valuable audience, more valuable attention, more receptivity to advertising, and better results, you start to tell that story across the board.
Branded content, is that what you're thinking of, or that's just one component of?
I
But what
think
about the volume? I understand the idea that it's great to have these partnerships and so on, and charge higher prices for this because these are quality formats. But what about the volume? Like, don't we need volume of advertising to really make the ends meet?
That's why
display.
you have the Tabulas of the world and all of the other ones that bring in all that volume.
Absolutely. Display is always a component, and as we've talked about, display will increasingly become short-form video. Display is always a component, but when you think about sort of your pyramid of success, when you focus on better, deeper partnerships that are grounded in different things in combination, programs and ecosystems and journeys and things like this, those are much more upstream, much higher revenue opportunities in general. Display is always a part of that, and you don't get out of the display business. You begin to do, but branded content and events, to your question, I think open the door to understanding what you're building and how you're positioning and your opportunity to sell deeper relationships as well.
Okay, so this is a great conversation, but I want to pivot for just a second to talk about where content creators fit in. We heard from a number of different content creators throughout this conference, and they talked about, we see the revenue trends when it comes to content creators. We see the audience trend when it comes to content creators. And so when you think about building this like diversified revenue mix, when you think about, better aligning advertising and subscriptions and all that, where do content creators fit in the mix? How do we get a piece of the pie that's moving over to them? Or maybe we don't, but how do we think about that?
That's a fantastic question. Actually, there are predictions that this year, for the first time, more money will be spent against content created by creators around the world than at professional content.
Yeah.
And of course, this is because money is following attention, and creators are increasingly getting more attention from consumers than professionally produced content. But this market is super fragmented. There are dozens of millions of creators around the world. And the success in this market is distributed, it's a very strong power law, meaning there's a few creators who are super successful. They are no longer like, people in their pajamas doing TikToks. They have like, Mr. Beast has a production company that, I think he has like 300 people employed, 400 million revenue and so on. And Mr. Beast is the biggest YouTuber in the world. So these are no longer, individual creators. These are media companies that just found a big distribution through social media, and now they're expanding into deals with, Amazon, Netflix, and so on and so on. So these are media companies, basically. Yeah, you could say startups, but really media companies. But the success is distributed like this. There's a few people who make a lot of money, and then most of people are making almost no money. I think that news media should think about it as a sort of a resource for new talent, resource for new formats, resource for alternative ways to reach audiences, and also new ideas how to reach audiences that are hard to reach for us, the younger audiences. And I think we can offer these people many things. Stability. We can offer them, regular salary. We can offer them support from legal, from product, from audience development, from monetization teams, and so on and so on. So, media companies, I think, have a lot to offer to creators, because not everybody will become Mr. Beast. There will be tons of creators who will be very good, but not there yet, and media can help them. So maybe the future will be like Matthias Döpfner, CEO of Axel Springer, predicts. A sort of media will become like record companies. They will, record labels, they will be looking for the best talent, and they will attract them, to work together with the news media companies, and they will provide all those services around it. So maybe the future newsroom will have, some journalists that work full time, and this is because they, work on investigative journalism, and they need a lot of supervision and some sort of work in teams. And at the same time, there will be freelancers and creators around who will help, for example, translating, factual journalism into stories for TikTok. And I think we don't necessarily need creators to become journalists, because this is not necessarily who they are and what they want to do, but they can be perfect interpreters. How to interpret this very important but boring thing about, security of Europe to the language of the teenagers who watch TikTok. It's important we talk to them about it, because this is about our future. But how do we do it? We don't know, perhaps because we are just old, and it's better to have help from creators.
Well, this was the focus on creators was one of my favorite sessions of the week, and I really enjoyed the passion of the presenters and making the case that many creators are journalists. They do want to provide a window on the world and operate from the same function as the classic journalistic model.
Advertising question, though.
Yeah.
So we heard a lot of creators, and we also heard traditional media companies talk about the challenge of trying to make money. To his point, there's obviously only a few doing it. And so we heard from someone who talked about how we're reaching younger audiences, we're doing these things on our own platforms, but when we're out there, we're not monetizing it. And so you saw one of the companies creating a future audiences lab to figure it out. So how do they monetize it? Should they even try? Are there ways to do it?
I think of this as fairly simple, from an advertising and a monetization perspective. You bring these people under the umbrella of the overarching brand. In a way, they're sub-brands, right? I think of Andrew Ross Sorkin and Dealbook at the New York Times as a prime example of this. He's a sub-brand. They built a franchise around him. And then when you bring them under the umbrella, what are they good at? They're good at authenticity. They're good at aggregating audiences. They're good at establishing a relationship with their audience that's built on their authenticity. What a prime way to integrate a brand into that partnership in a way that makes sense for the creator, the overarching brand, and the sub-brand. So back to the things that we were talking about earlier, what another great entry point like events and branded content to provide a framework for something special and interesting. Back to Dealbook as a model. When sponsors come into the Dealbook world, they're part of the franchise. Semaphore, you could argue, not necessarily creator-driven journalism business, but they've certainly built up their journalistic personalities in the context of what they call live journalism, right?
Yeah.
And brands have a natural integration into that. It's, again, something special, something that provides an opportunity to integrate into the context. And by the way, something that brands can't get elsewhere in the general environment, which if you're just competing on display, you're competing with everyone. You don't have a differentiating factor. So these things that make you different, that make you special, that provide brands with an opportunity to do something multifaceted with you that's grounded in the relationship that you have with the audience, and reaching these valuable super users, super consumers in authentic ways is something very special.
So as you hear in one sentence, when we think about creators, when we think about digital advertising, about AI agents, we tend to look at opportunities rather than just focus on the threats. And I think this was something that really connected all those different subjects in our discussions in Dublin.
I think so too. Okay, one headline that you took coming out of this. One headline, very quickly.
One headline.
One headline.
From all of it.
From your discussions of revenue specifically, subscription, advertising.
I think this is the final moment people understand that, all the business depends on consumers, on customers. Yeah. And I think this shift to customer centricity is really what drives subscriptions, what drives advertising, what drives our thinking about the future with creators and the future with AI agents. Yeah.
That was good, but it was a really long headline. I don't think it was very SEO friendly. Let's see if Gabe can do better.
I'm going to go with holistic revenue strategy is key to survival over the long term.
We'll ask ChatGPT to clean that up a little for you, but it's good. So this has been a really insightful conversation. We could continue it, but I think we're getting kicked off stage. There's a city to explore, beer to be drank, and so...
Customers first.
That's better, yes.